Hey friends, I read 17 books in August, including several of the books I read for the Newt's Magical Readathon, which should be coming back in some form this year under a new name. I had a great time with these challenges, and more importantly, with these 17 books. I read one children's book, the very first in a series in fact. It was The Invasion by K.A. Applegate, the very first book in the Animorphs series. I read my fair share of these books. Growing up with 6 older siblings meant that I inherited a book collection as people moved out, and that included plenty of pulp fiction. The basic premise of this series is that some kids are given the power to transform into animals by an alien who crash lands on Earth. These kids use their new powers to stop an evil alien invasion from aliens that basically are parasites who use mind control on their victims. I'm not sure if I ever read the first book growing up, but this is an overwhelmingly interesting book. Honestly, like children's pulp fiction is a fascinating genre. I'm giving The Invasion by K.A. Applegate 3 stars. I read 9 young adult fiction books in August. Young adult fiction is by far my favorite genre. I started reading the Sidekick Squad series with Not Your Sidekick by C.B. Lee. This book follows Jessica Tran, a Chinese-Vietnamese bisexual growing up in a not-so-distant future where a giant disaster about 100 years ago gave a tiny percentage of the human population superpowers, powers that can be passed down genetically. Jessica's parents are local superheroes, her big sister is a rising star on the national stage, and Jessica doesn't have powers. So since she can't become a superhero, she decides to just focus on her college application and gets a paid internship. Because for some reason, 100 years from now, we still have unpaid internships. We've imagined a sustainable future where the world relies on clean energy, but we still have unpaid internships. Jessica shows up to her paid internship, and it turns out to be working for local villains. But on the bright side, her crush Abby works there, and together they discover a dangerous plot that is way bigger than heroes and villains entirely. I loved this book. It was adventurous, fun, and heartfelt. I'm giving Not Your Sidekick by C.B. Lee 4 stars. Next, I read From Twinkle with Love by Sandhya Menon. If you're at all familiar with Sandhya Menon, then you'll accurately guess that this is an Indian romantic comedy. So Twinkle is a high school student who wants to be a director. So when a high school film critic, Sahil Roy, approaches her to make a movie together for the upcoming summer festival, she jumps at the chance to collaborate. Especially since it gives her a chance to get closer to her longtime crush Neil Roy, also known as Sahil's twin brother. But it turns out the romance she scripted isn't the one she's going to get. This is an overwhelmingly sweet book with flat and vaguely one-dimensional characters that is just tons of fun. I'm giving From Twinkle with Love by Sandhya Menon 3 stars. The third young adult book I read was Love Boat Taipei by Abigail Hing-wen. Our protagonist is Ever Wan, a dancer, choreographer, and all-around good kid. So she is furious when her parents decide to send her away to Taiwan to study Mandarin for a summer with a bunch of overachieving rich kids without even asking her what she wants. What her parents don't know though is that this program is infamous as a romantic meetup, and the kids are more interested in clubbing than cultural exchange. This isn't a great book. I found the love triangle to be overwhelmingly one-sided, the friendships lacking depth, and honestly everything somehow was overdramatic and underwhelming at the same time. There is supposed to be a sequel, but I don't think I will be reading it. This book was fine. If you're a fan of Crazy Rich Asians, you'll probably enjoy this book. But I really only thought it was okay. I'm giving Love Boat Taipei by Abigail Hing-wen 3 stars. I also picked up Odd One Out by Nick Stone. This is one story told by 3 different people. Courtney Cooper, a black straight boy who is in love with his best friend, Jupiter Charity Sanchez, who is a Latinx lesbian, and Ray Evelyn Chin, a new girl who is Asian and gets accepted and pulled into their friendship and is also attracted to them both. This book was not for me. There was some biphobia in this book that goes completely unchallenged. I felt like the 3 characters were too similar in how they conceptualize things, and a lot of the time their choices don't really make sense. I felt like I never really got to know any of the main characters the way that this book was split up, and ultimately I think this book was just kind of messy. I'm giving Odd One Out by Nick Stone 2 stars. Next, I struggled through The Boy and the Striped Pajamas by John Boyne. This is historical fiction. A 9-year-old boy moves because his dad got a new job running a concentration camp in Nazi Germany, and he befriends one of the little boys who lives inside the concentration camp. This book is overhyped and underwhelming, and all of the kids read as much younger than the author says that they are, which really just makes it feel like the author did no research and has never spent any time around any child. And our protagonist doesn't seem to know literally any aspect of the culture he is allegedly growing up in. This book was patronizing and filled with historical inaccuracies. I get that the author is trying to show the abstract idea of how children are taught to hate and don't naturally come up with ideas about racism and anti-Semitism and perpetuate those toxic ideas. But this was not, in my opinion, a good way to learn about that, learn about any aspect of the Holocaust or the people who lived through it. I'm giving The Boy in the Striped Pajamas by John Boyne 2 stars. So after being depressed by a Holocaust story, I picked up The Geography of You and Me by Jennifer E. Smith. This is a nice, light romance. Lucy and Owen meet when they are trapped in an elevator together in New York City during a citywide blackout. They have a magical night together, but when the power comes back on, it ends. Lucy moves to Edinburgh with her parents, and Owen travels out west with his father. They stay in touch through postcards and the occasional email until they can reunite in a city where they first met. This book is a map of a long-distance relationship. This isn't a realistic love story, but it was fun. I'm giving The Geography of You and Me by Jennifer E. Smith 3 stars. Next, I want to talk about Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. I've talked about this book a few times already, but that's what happens when you're months behind on a reading wrap-up. This book is about two sisters meeting for the first time after their father dies in a plane crash. Their father had two families, one in Haiti and one in New York. The two sisters bond in their grief, and it is one of the best stories I read last year. The writing was phenomenal, the characters interesting and complicated, and just everything about it was great. I'm giving Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo 5 stars. Another truly excellent book I picked up was The Henna Wars by Adiba Jaigirdar. This is about a South Asian Muslim girl growing up in Ireland who comes out as a lesbian at the beginning of the book. Her parents don't take it well and just sort of decide to not talk about it or to her at all because they see queerness as something that belongs to white culture. Obviously, that's quite sad. So our protagonist throws herself into building a henna business for a school business competition, fully embracing her culture while being a lesbian. When she finds out that a black Brazilian girl that she has a crush on is also starting a henna business with her white cousin for the competition, there's a really thoughtful conversation and argument about cultural appropriation and how that works. This was an amazing book. It felt important while I was reading it, and I was totally sucked in. I'm giving The Henna Wars by Adiba Jaigirdar 4 stars. The last young adult fiction book I read was The Voting Booth by Brandy Colbert. Marva Sheridan just turned 18 and is so excited to vote in her first election. She's always been driven and willing to do whatever it takes to make a difference. So when she goes to her polling place before school and sees Duke get turned away, she decides to make sure that his vote gets counted. She's knocked doors, she's registered voters, and she is not about to let the system stop this boy from voting, even though Duke is more concerned about his band's first gig than the election. The pair spend the whole day together, going from precinct to precinct, waiting in long lines, and getting turned away, all while trying to do the simple act of voting. The pair form a real friendship and connection throughout the day. As a political organizer, I loved this book. I loved the romance, I loved Marva's cat Instagram account, and I loved how it shows what voter suppression looks like, while showing you what we can do about it. I'm giving The Voting Booth by Brandy Colbert 4 stars. Moving on, I read 2 comic books in August. First, I read Love is Love, a comic book anthology to benefit the survivors of the Orlando Pulse shooting by various authors and artists. Not to discourage you from buying or reading an anthology for charity, but I did not like this. I thought it was going to be a collection of optimistic, or at least honest stories of LGBTQ people and our experiences. I was expecting to see some people of color contribute based on the circumstances of the attack. I was expecting some of the stories to reflect on the Pulse shooting, but in fact, most of the stories were reflecting on the shooting and on gun violence in general, and a lot of the anthology was vying for allies, not LGBTQ people. This was really for straight, cis people. There were very few actual stories, as some people only had a page or 2 to contribute, and a lot of those stories were repetitive. Straight white guys seeing the news break and not knowing what to do or what to say, and ultimately this book disappointed me. It's a good cause though, and I did like some of the anthology, so I'm giving Love is Love 3 stars. The second comic I read was Mooncakes by Suzanne Walker and Wendy Xu. This is a supernatural queer romance and is cute as heck. Nova Wan is a witch. She works at her grandmother's bookshop and helps the two of them loan out spell books and investigate supernatural occurrences. One night while investigating, she spots her childhood crush Tam, who is a werewolf and is battling a demon. Nova invites Tam to stay with her at her grandmother's upon finding out that Tam ran away from home. Tam ran away from a bad home situation years ago. The two rekindled their friendship and maybe a little bit more while investigating what exactly attacked Tam and why. It's cute, it's fun, it's surprisingly wholesome. I'm giving Mooncakes by Suzanne Walker and Wendy Xu 4 stars. I read one new adult fiction book that is also a sci-fi book. I read A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor by Hank Green. This is the sequel to An Absolutely Remarkable Thing. This book has a shifting vantage point between some of April May's friends after the end of the first book. If you want a book with advanced AI, alien life, people coming together to build a future they believe in, an examination of bias in the tech industry, queer romance, and just so much more, then please pick this series up. I'm giving A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor 4 stars. I read 4 nonfiction books in August, and they cover a broad range of topics. Let's start with Common Sense by Thomas Paine. This was a pamphlet published anonymously just months before the Declaration of Independence, and was a radical call for America to free itself of British rule and establish a new government based on social equality instead of aristocratic institutions. I'm giving Common Sense by Thomas Paine 4 stars. Next, I read Feminism is for Everybody by Bell Hooks. This was meant to be a guidebook to feminism and how everyday people can fight sexism. It is relatively accessible, and I anticipate that I will be talking more about this book on this channel very soon. I gave Feminism is for Everybody by Bell Hooks 4 stars. I picked up, obviously, Stories from My Timeline by Akilah Hughes. This memoir is great if you're already a fan of Akilah Hughes. Akilah grew up in a small town in Kentucky, graduated high school at 15, and eventually moved to New York City to become a writer and performer. I grew to love her through YouTube videos made in the early 2010s, but I believe she now hosts a podcast for Crooked Media. I found this memoir to be a funny and at times blunt coming-of-age story. I'm giving Obviously by Akilah Hughes 4 stars. And the last book I read in August was Catch and Kill, Lies, Spies, and a Conspiracy to Protect Predators by Ronan Farrow. This is a memoir about Ronan's time collecting information on Harvey Weinstein's pattern of sexual misconduct and the many hurdles he had to jump to be able to actually report on the story as a journalist. It's a dramatic account of violence and espionage while discussing the many problems in our culture and how powerful people work to cover up stories of abuse. It was thrilling, but it was also just sad. So many people survived so much pain, and it took so much work for them to be able to tell their stories. I'm very grateful for the work Ronan Farrow did to tell these stories, and I am giving Catch and Kill, Lies, Spies, and a Conspiracy to Protect Predators 5 stars. Those are all 17 books I read in August. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. Let me know if you've read any of these books down in the comments, and if you want to see more from me, you can subscribe, watch another video of mine, or support me on Patreon. And hey, I love you!